My name is Dale Ward, and I wrote a 30,000-word thesis about how Michael Myers from the Halloween movies is a Zen master. I called it Zen and the Art of Halloween, an analysis of Zen master Michael Myers. This video is chapter 3 of my thesis, and these are some of my Halloween paintings that will be appearing in the background. So let's get into chapter 3, which is titled Śūnyatā. Or if you're gonna pronounce it wrong, Samhain Śūnyatā. My third proof of Michael Myers being a Zen master is that he has no ego, and he is totally empty. Moreover, Michael is so completely vacant that he not only has zero ego identity, he is also nameless and formless. In other words, he is beyond all words, names, labels, and categories of identification to the point where he is no longer Michael Myers. It can only be said that Michael Myers is the shape of Michael Myers. In Buddhism, all identifications and labels are generalized as Nāmarūpa, which comes from the Sanskrit words nama, meaning name, and rupa, meaning form. So Nāmarūpa can essentially be translated as named form. But Michael Myers is the named form that is so frighteningly abstract that we can't accurately describe him, nor can we correctly identify his evil existence by calling him Michael Myers. The closest we can come to naming his dark form is with the words the shape, because Michael Myers is the shape of formlessness. This means that he is beyond Nāmarūpa, because when you try to name or describe him as Michael Myers or even the shape, you are only using words and methods of communication to represent him and his form, but those words are not what he really is. His actual existence is too dreadful and ominous to properly identify. In this way, the shape has transcended all names and forms because he is beyond words. Thus, any name or label for Michael Myers is known as Māyā. Māyā is a Sanskrit word literally meaning illusion. Māyā indicates that all human concepts and ideas, such as names and labels, are unreal illusions, which can trick or treat the mind by concealing the true nature of the universe. Accordingly, identifying him with the words Michael Myers is Māyā, because words cannot kill you. It is the shape as a physical being in reality who kills you, not words. In other words, no names or labels can come close to the reality of his existence, because he is horrifyingly indescribable and terrifyingly inconceivable. Michael Myers is the shape of terror. Or should I say Michael Myers? Am I right? Anyone? A good metaphor for Māyā is a whirlpool in a river, because it has new water continuously flowing through it, so it's never the same whirlpool. We can see the whirlpool and label it for purposes of identification, location, and discussion, but we cannot positively define it, nor can we actually grasp it in physical reality. Over and above that is the fact that the water is composed of atoms and molecules, which are also constantly moving and changing. This all indicates that any identification of the whirlpool is only an idea or concept, and there is no permanent definable entity. Therefore, what is named is merely the pattern of the water, or the shape of the whirlpool. In the same way, Michael Myers is the shape of a whirlpool. of death. The shape is like liquid death. He is fluid darkness, the flowing of the absence of light and life. He is the inevitable and unstoppable egoless entity of extinguishment, which we have many names for. Sometimes we call him Michael Myers or the Shape. Other times it's more appropriate to refer to him only as Death. An example of this was when Michael Myers came back to his hometown of Haddonfield on Halloween in 1978, and Dr. Loomis said to Sheriff Brackett, quote, "Death has come to your little town, Sheriff." Because Michael Myers is the shape of death. In certain circumstances, the best label for Michael Myers is the darkest one imaginable, and it will only suffice to simply call him evil. For example, when Michael escaped the sanitarium in 1978, Dr. Loomis exclaimed, "He's gone! He's gone from here! The evil is gone!" And the next day on Halloween, Loomis said of Myers, quote, "I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil." Michael Myers has clearly transcended his name, his form, and his ego identity. He has become something else. He is a symbol, an icon of pure evil, wearing the mask of a person. Michael Myers is the shape of evil. But again, all names and labels for Michael Myers are illusions, Māyā, to the point where the most accurate description of him is often just the Boogeyman. As when little Tommy Doyle saw the Shape on Halloween night in 1978 and screamed, "The Boogeyman's outside! The Boogeyman's outside!" Which is very significant since Tommy didn't even know what that meant. This was proven earlier that night when Tommy asked, "Laurie, what's the Boogeyman?" And this question was never answered, and it never will be answered, because it is unanswerable. The Boogeyman as a concept is inconceivable. Therefore, no one can ever say what he truly is. In fact, it's even difficult to say what he looks like, as when Tommy told Laurie, "I saw the Boogeyman! I saw him outside!" And Laurie asked him, "What do you look like?" But Tommy couldn't even begin to describe the shape, so he simply said, "The Boogeyman." And I think that is as accurate as anyone can be, because the Boogeyman is beyond words and concepts. He is beyond name and form. Michael Myers is the unidentifiable, indescribable shape of the Boogeyman. In Buddhism, transcending all identifications, names, and forms the way Michael Myers has is an important step towards enlightenment. As the prolific Zen monk and scholar D.T. Suzuki said, quote, "Suffering never befalls him who clings not to name and form and is detached." End quote. The shape is clearly detached from everything, including all names and forms. And maybe that's why he never seems to suffer, no matter how many times he is shot or stabbed. In Zen, it's essential to go beyond Nāmarūpa and Māyā because it leads to the realization of the true voidness of existence. This void is called Śūnyatā. The Sanskrit word Śūnyatā is usually translated as emptiness or voidness, and it's one of the most important and fundamental concepts in Zen. Śūnyatā represents the void out of which the ultimate reality is formed. In other words, all entities, distinctions, and dualities arise from nothingness. And obviously the boogeyman also arose from the void as well. But the shape didn't just come from the void, he is a living embodiment of it. He has transcended the Māyā of ego and Nāmarūpa to exist as the pure reality of nameless and formless absence. Michael Myers is the shape of the void. There's a very famous scripture in Mahayana Buddhism called the Heart Sutra, which says, quote, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form," end quote. And the boogeyman truly embodies this statement because he is the form of emptiness. He is an empty form. Obviously, Michael Myers is the shape of emptiness. Michael Myers is exactly like a pumpkin. Most people think he's a vegetable that doesn't move, but then on Halloween, precisely like a pumpkin, he appears to be animated by a burning soul, and even seems to have almost human features. In reality, however, both the pumpkin and the shape are hollow and empty, with no humanity whatsoever. It was simply that Michael Myers became the boogeyman, just as the hollowed pumpkin became the hallowed jack-o'-lantern only on Halloween. Undeniably, Michael Myers is the shape of Halloween. Side note, it's a mistake to identify Michael Myers and pumpkins as vegetables, because pumpkins are fruits, and we don't know what the boogeyman is. But he definitely isn't a vegetable. Zen Master Dogen said, quote, "If you want to travel the way of Buddhas and Zen masters, then expect nothing, seek nothing, and grasp nothing." End quote. This is the nothingness that Michael Myers is full of. Dr. Loomis affirmed the fact that there's nothing inside Michael when he said, quote, "I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong." It's clear that the boogeyman is an egoless personification of pure nothingness. In other words, Michael Myers is the shape of nothing. The Dr. Loomis quote continues, quote, "I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes." All of these statements from Dr. Loomis make it very clear that Michael Myers has surpassed any ego identity that he once may have had, and after he transcended into the egoless void, the shape that Myers became bore the countenance of his empty vacancy. Moreover, Michael's unification with the void was perfected and displayed even further when he donned his iconic mask on Halloween in 1978. The mask that the shape wears is a perfectly blank, white, expressionless facade, so it's as if Dr. Loomis was talking about Michael's face and Michael's mask when he said that Myers has a blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes. And I think his mask is a perfect metaphor for the fact that the boogeyman has no ego identity. In other words, his mask is a reflection of a reflection, because Michael's mask is the face of the void. But I will talk more about his mask later. In Buddhism, one of the 3 marks of existence is that there is no self, and more importantly, there's no self to be attached to. All ego identities are seen as illusions, and there's no affirmed belief in any actual individual self or soul. And this perfectly describes Michael Myers, because we all know that the boogeyman definitely does not have a soul, in any sense of human conceptualization. The negation of belief in self is represented by the Buddhist doctrine called Anātman. The word Anātman is derived from the Sanskrit root Atman, meaning self or essence, and the prefix An, meaning non. So this idea focuses on realizing your non-self, which is essentially facing the fact that your ego identity does not exist. In other words, your idea of yourself does not exist in reality, and the ego is an ephemeral experience. So in Buddhism, there's no confirmation of any permanent underlying individual self. Thus, through Anātman, one learns to be in an egoless, empty space, just like the boogeyman. Michael Myers is the shape of Anātman, to the point where even his eyes embody and reflect the fact that his selfless existence is full of empty, hollow nothingness. As Loomis says, Myers has the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. This is because the boogeyman is the darkest, most empty entity imaginable. He is the soulless, egoless, indistinguishable thing in the shadows where the light cannot reach. Michael Myers is the shape of darkness. Darkness is the absence of light, and Michael Myers is the shape of absence in many ways. Therefore, I think that a shadow is a good metaphor for Michael Myers as well as the doctrine of Anātman, because the shadow of a person can appear to be a real individual entity with an ego self or soul, but that's only an illusion. A shadow is simply the blocking of light, in the same way that the ego is the blocking of enlightenment. Which is to say that a shadow of a person is not a person, even though it's in the shape of a person and can move like a person. In exactly the same way as a shadow, Michael Myers is darkness in the shape of a person, but he is not a person. The boogeyman is the literal personification of darkness. He is a human shadow, the shape of a human, but not a human. In other words, Michael Myers is the shape of a shadow. The founder of analytical psychology, Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung, coined the term shadow to represent the psychologically hidden, repressed, or denied parts of the self, which are usually the darker parts of the self. The shadow is the darkness that lurks outside the light of consciousness, but is still an important part of what makes and shapes one's personality because it subconsciously influences one's behavior, especially when it's ignored. Michael Myers is an embodiment of the shadow because the boogeyman is the darkness in our minds. He is the individual and collective dark side of human consciousness. The shape is a living shadow that lives in the shadows because he is made of shadows. He has no ego, self, or soul. He is human darkness, the absence of all light. In this respect, he is the shape of physical and psychological darkness, meaning that Michael Myers is the shape of every shadow. Carl Jung's theory was that in order to become a whole, totally aware and complete person, you need to integrate the shadow into your being. In other words, bring the darkness of the shadow into your known personality and make it a conscious part of who you are. Michael Myers, however, is beyond being a whole person because he is the shadow. And he has no ego nor any ideas of humanity, so he couldn't care less about being any type of person. In fact, the shape doesn't have a self to care about, therefore he doesn't have any cares whatsoever. So it doesn't matter to the boogeyman what other people think or do because Michael Myers is the shape of apathy. And there are many examples, victims, of Michael's lack of caring. One example of his apathy was on Halloween in 1978 when Michael walked around the Wallace house with Annie's corpse in his arms and not a care in the world who saw him. That was when Tommy Doyle screamed, "The boogeyman's outside! The boogeyman's outside!" So perhaps the reason why Michael never defends himself is because he doesn't care about anything, including himself, because because he has no self. Myers is an empty killing machine, not a defending machine. He's been shot and stabbed many times, but he never tries to stop it. Instead, he just keeps attacking and never defends, proving that the best defense is a good offense. Michael has no cares, no dreams, no goals, and he doesn't worry or stress about any concepts, ideas, beliefs, opinions, or even himself. Therefore, he has no sense for self-preservation, and I think this is all because his ego does not exist. Furthermore, whatever he is seems to know it, feel it, and most importantly, is totally unified with it. In fact, Michael Myers is it. And Dr. Loomis seemed to know it as well, because he constantly referred to Michael as it. An example of this was when Nurse Marion asked Loomis in regards to the handling of Myers, "Are there any special instructions?" Dr. Loomis replied,
"Just try to understand what we're dealing with here. Don't underestimate it."
Marion then asked,
"Don't you think we can refer to it as him?"
And Loomis responded,
"If you say so."
In fact, even Laurie Strode confirmed Michael's itness. After Dr. Loomis shot the Shape 6 times on Halloween in 1978, Laurie said to Loomis, "It was the Boogeyman." To which Loomis replied,
As a matter of fact, it was.
Because Michael Myers is the shape of it. Both Loomis and Laurie seem to know that Michael Myers has no self and no ego, and that all names and labels for him are only for purposes of communication about Michael Myers. But names and labels have nothing to do with reality when it comes to the shape, because the Boogeyman is not made of words. You cannot be killed by communication. Words, texts, and sounds cannot take your life. But the entity known as Michael Myers can and will. To finalize my point that the Boogeyman is beyond all classification, Zen Master Mumon Eikai said the following as if he was speaking directly about the shape. Quote, "Some Zen students do not realize the true man in a mask because they recognize ego soul. Ego soul is the seed of birth and death, and foolish people call it the true man." End quote. Michael Myers is the true man in a mask. He is the seed of death. Therefore, in reality, he is not Michael Myers any more than a shark is the name that you call it while it tears your throat out. Even labeling that animal a shark is not actual reality, just like calling Michael Myers a man is not actual reality. Proof of this was on Halloween night in 1978 when Dr. Loomis and Sheriff Brackett were at the Myers house and they found a dead dog. Loomis muttered,
"He got hungry."
Brackett responded,
"A man wouldn't do that."
and Dr. Loomis darkly replied,
"This isn't a man."
In summary, everything about the Boogeyman is a display of empty, unidentifiable egolessness. His nameless existence, his vague and indistinguishable shape-like nature, his totally emotionless face, and the blank mask that he wears over it, right down to his empty and vacant eyes. Everything about Michael Myers perfectly reflects his abiding and foreboding within the egoless void. Interestingly, neither Zen nor the universe can be accurately described or properly talked about with words, and the same can be said or not said about the shape. Therefore, Śūnyatā is fundamentally showing itself through the Boogeyman. In this way, Michael can be seen as a teacher of nothing, which is precisely what a Zen master is. Moreover, Myers conveys nothingness without speaking a word. And that's often the same method that Zen masters will use to teach about the void. For these reasons, the boogeyman is clearly a Zen master, because he is a perfect personification of egolessness and empty nothingness. In other words, he is Śūnyatā in the flesh. Michael Myers is the Shape of Śūnyatā. Māyā is an example of this was when Michael Myers is a and Sarah inconceivable to exist at 1978. For example, to the point where unanswerable. The founder of analytical psychology, side note, and this perfectly describes Michael Myers. Atman meaning self. So this idea the reason why he never the ego. Therefore, Śūnyatā is fundamentally showing itself through the boogeyman. Nothingness without speaking a word. Michael Myers is the shape of a whirlpool of death. Labels are Samhain Śūnyatā. Is the evil ever really gone?